Welcome to this YSL Power BI tutorial. In this video we'll look at how to import multiple text or Excel files into a single report. We'll start by looking at importing files one by one and then appending them into a single table in the query editor, before we move on and look at how you can import all the files in a folder using just one single query. We'll look at what happens when you change the list of files in the folder you've imported, such as deleting old files and including new ones. And then we'll talk about some of the potential pitfalls of having inconsistencies between the files you're importing. The last part of the video explains quickly how you can import from a single folder which includes mixed files. So let's get started. To get started, you'll need a copy of the files I've prepared for this session, and I'll stick a link in the video description below so that you can download this zip file. And when you've extracted that, you'll find a couple of loose files, an Excel workbook and a text file, and then a couple of folders, one of which contains multiple Excel workbooks and the other contains multiple text files. Once you've got hold of the copy of the data, you'll also need a copy of Power BI Desktop. I'm currently running the June 2019 update for this application. If you're not quite sure how to install that yet, or you haven't done it yet, we do have a video which explains how to do that, part 1.1 of this series, installing Power BI Desktop. We'll begin by looking at the slightly longer way of importing multiple text files. So from a brand new blank report, in the Home tab of the ribbon, I'll click the bottom half of the Get Data button and then choose Text/CSV. All the text files I've prepared for this video are tab delimited files, but CSV works equally well if you want to practice this with your own data. So I'll choose text or CSV, then navigate to the folder into which I extracted my sample files, and then in there I'll head into the UK Top 10 by Year Text folder. In there are 5 text files, each one contains the top 10 films in the UK for the given year. It would be nice to be able to select all 5 files at the same time here, but I can't select multiple files in this dialog box, which is one of the things that makes this such a long-winded process. I'll start by importing the top 10 for 2014 by selecting that file and then clicking open, or just double-clicking the file name. And that will open up a very basic import dialog box. It shows me the data that I've got in the file. It shows me the file origin and the delimiter that it's detected, which it's detected correctly that it's a tab delimited file. So really at this point, all I need to do is click the load button to have those 10 rows imported into a separate table in my data model. When that finally happens, we can have a quick check in the list. If we look on the data view of the menu, we can see that we get those 10 films imported, and we'll see we can start creating visuals immediately. But I don't want to do that. I want the other 5 years, or the other 4 years imported as well. I'm actually not going to import all 5 years in total. I'll just go with another couple of years, but just to give you the idea. If I head back to the Get Data button and then choose Text CSV again, I'll go for the top 10 in 2015. I should be able to accept all the default settings. You'll notice that I've got the same column names in each file, so they match exactly. I've got the same data types in each file, so I've got numbers, text, text, numbers, and numbers again. If I then click the load button, that will load in the year for 2015. Then I can go back to Get Data one more time and then choose Text CSV, and I'll go for the 2016 year as well. Just accept all the options that are set for me automatically, click load, and I've got my 3 separate text files imported. Now, although I've got all my data imported into the data model, it's currently spread across 3 separate tables, hopefully as you'd expect, having performed 3 separate imports. You can see the 3 separate tables in the fields list on the right-hand side of the screen, or even more clearly in the model view if you have a quick look at that. Now, in order to create visuals effectively containing all of this data, we need to combine these 3 tables into one single list. And in order to do that, we're going to use the query editor. So to do that, we can use either the top half of the Edit Queries button in the Home tab of the ribbon, or from the drop-down list, we can choose Edit Queries to launch the Query Editor tool. The next thing we'll do is take each of the 3 separate queries we've created so far and combine them into one single new list using the Append Queries option at the right-hand side of the Home tab of the ribbon. In order to make this work, we do need some consistency between the 3 separate queries. So for example, we need to make sure we have the same column names so that they can be mapped to each other, and we need each column in different tables to have the same data types. So for example, rank must always contain a number, title must always contain text across the 3 separate queries. One of the advantages of using the long-winded method of importing multiple files is that we can use the tools in the query editor to mold our data to make sure that it's consistent. So if we had, for instance, different column names between the different queries, we could just rename them here. We can equally change the data types just by using the data type tool. But as our data is pretty consistent already, all we need to do at this point is head to the Append Queries option. I'll use the drop-down list at the right-hand side and choose to append queries as new. So this will create a completely separate new table rather than add existing data into one of our existing tables. So I'll choose Append Queries as new, and then when the dialog box finally appears, we get to choose how many tables to append. I'll choose 3 or more tables. I'll already have the selected query table on the right hand side, so I just need to double click the other 2 to add them to the list, and then I can click OK to combine all 3 tables into one single query. Append 1 is a fairly rubbish name for the results of this, so let's change the name of this using the properties window on the right hand side, and then I'll call this one, let's just call it Top 10 UK. I can then hit enter and then choose close and apply to load my new query into my data model and see a bunch of relationships get created automatically. This is something we talked about in the previous video. Power BI tries to look for similarly named columns to match those and create relationships. If you hover the mouse over the relationship line, it will show you which columns it has joined in that relationship. We could manually delete those if we needed to, but actually what we're going to do next is remove our 3 original queries from the data model entirely. There's absolutely no reason to have them in here in the first place now. We've got all the data we need in this Top 10 UK query. So to get rid of them, we can either do this from the model view in the Power BI desktop, or we could also head back to the query editor tool. So if I head back to the query editor by clicking Edit Queries, I can choose to not load the original queries into my data model by right-clicking on the query on the left-hand side and disable the Enable Load option just by selecting it. You will get a little warning that that this will be removed from the report, and any visuals that rely on that will be broken. But that's fine because we haven't created any visuals yet, so we can just click Continue, and you'll see that the name of the query gets grayed out and goes into italic text. So let's right-click on each of these and choose to disable the load and choose we want to confirm that. This is exactly what would happen, by the way, if we just deleted the tables from the data model in the Power BI desktop application. So having done that, you might be asking why I don't just delete them entirely. Well, the main reason for that is that I can't. The Top 10 UK query relies on the existence of these 3 original ones. And if you're not sure about that, you can always head to the View tab in the ribbon in the Query Editor and choose Query Dependencies. And this will show you if I select my Top 10 UK query, it highlights everything else. So it's everything else is required in order for the Top 10 UK query to exist. So I'll close down that dialog box and then I'll head back to the Home tab of the Query Editor, then choose Close and Apply. And at this point, when my data model updates, I've got my one single required table in my data model ready to start creating visuals from. So that technique works quite well for a small number of files, but it does have a couple of disadvantages. Obviously, if you have a large number of files, it's very tedious to have to import each file in a separate query before appending them to a single continuous list. Secondly, if your list of files is constantly changing, if you're deleting old files and adding new ones to a folder, this technique is no good because you'd have to manually edit your queries to take that into account. We can solve both of those problems by using the Import from Folder option in Power BI Desktop. So to demonstrate that, let's create a brand new blank report. I'll press Ctrl N on the keyboard to start creating a brand new blank report. And then when that one's finished loading, I will close down the one that we've just been working on, and I won't bother saving the changes to that one. So nearly there. Always seems to take a long time to do, despite it opening up essentially a blank report. There we go, all done. I'll just close down the previous one that we were working on, and I will not bother saving the changes. And then I'll just close down the splash screen for the moment and look at how we can import data from a folder. The option to import from a folder isn't in the short list that appears when you click the drop-down arrow on the Get Data button, so you can either click that drop-down arrow and then choose More, or just click the top half of the Get Data button to launch the dialog box which shows you a list of all the available connectors. You should find folder sitting quite close to the top of the list, so you can select that and then click connect. And then you'll need to point to a folder containing the files you want to import. So I'll expand this PC and OSC and PBI data and UK top 10 by year text. Now this works best if the folder you're pointing to contains only those files that you want to import. It's a little more awkward if you have a mix of different files, but if I click OK at this point, what I should see is that the list of 5 files listed are only those that I want to import. It is possible to edit this query at this stage to eliminate any that you don't need, but as I've only included files that I want to import at this point, I've got a couple of choices. I could click the edit button and then complete the combination process in the Power Query editor. Or we could just see how Power Query gets on by clicking the Combine button drop-down list and then choosing Combine and Load. When we do that, we'll launch essentially another little miniature wizard that asks us to pick which file we would like to use as our example. As all of our files in this particular folder are configured in exactly the same way, they have the same schema, they're all tab delimited files, they've got the same column names, they've got the same data types. We don't really need to do anything. It doesn't matter which file we picked as the example, so we might as well just leave it as first file. We can then click OK, and then as if by magic, what Power Query will do is work out how to combine those 5 separate files into one single continuous list and present that to us in a single table. And if we have a quick look in the data view of the Power BI desktop application, there we go, we can see all of the files, all 10 films from all 5 years have all been imported all at once. If you wanted to see how Power Query has come up with this list of data, you can open up the query editor to see what it's done. So if we click the top half of the Edit Queries button, and then we'll be presented with the list of final results that get imported into the data model using this query here. But you'll see that that's not the only query available. We've got 5 queries in total to generate this final list. The other 4 are just greyed out with this italicized text for their names, so that indicates that they're not being loaded into the final model. But if we just quickly go through them, the first one there, sample file, is used to just read essentially the contents of the first file that's in the folder we've pointed to. Then the second step there is a parameter. So this is essentially a place to hold the contents of each file in the folder in turn, one by one. Then there's a query, sort of a more traditional query as we understand it. It's got the same icon you can see as the queries we've been building so far. There are not many steps in there. This essentially just parses the sample file, works out how many columns there are, what their names are, and then the sort of encoding of the text file, what delimiter is used. Really all it does is promotes the headers into the top row of that output. Then this interesting one here, this is a custom function that's been generated that works out how to parse each individual file. And this function has a single parameter which can accept the contents of any file to be parsed. That function then gets used in the one query that is loaded into the final data model. And you can see here there's a step here, the third step, invoke custom function. So that's the one that takes the contents of each file in turn and then spits it out into this single continuous list. Then we get some renamed columns, remove other columns, expand the tables, and then change the data types so that everything essentially comes out as one single continuous table at the end. Now, although Power Query has already done the bulk of the hard work, there are still some tweaks you might like to make. So for example, you've got a source name column here that contains the file name of the original source for that row of data. We could just delete that if we wanted to, there's no reason to keep it. But imagine perhaps you didn't have this extra year column in your underlying data. We've actually indicated, of course, which year each row comes from with a separate column. But if that wasn't there, you could extract the year by using the source name of the file. So to do that, we could just start splitting this column. So for example, I could right-click the source name column, and then I could choose split column. And what I'm going to do is choose to split by a delimiter. That opens up a dialog box which asks me which delimiter I would like to use. I'm going to go with the default one that was selected for me already, the one called space. Or I could use a custom delimiter if I wanted to here as well. But what I'm going to do is split everything after the last space in the source name. So I'll choose the rightmost delimiter for this option and then click OK. And I'll get a second source name column. I can then split out the year from that column by looking for either the full stop, which separates the year from the extension of the file name, or I could also just extract the last 4 characters or the first 4 characters to get the year. So let's right click on the source name 2 column, and then let's choose split column again. Let's go by number of characters this time. Let's get the first 4 characters. So we'll go for 4, want as far left as possible. And then if we click OK, we'll get our year extracted into a separate column from the full file name. I can then just highlight the other 2 columns I don't need any longer, and I can right click on those and choose to remove them. And then I could just double click on the top of the column name to rename it, and I'll call this, let's call it year from file name, just to distinguish it from our original year column. So I'll hit enter to rename that. The data type's been detected already, so at this point all I'm going to do is close and apply those changes back into the data model by clicking that button. And when all the changes have been applied, we will see our nice clean set of data again. The great thing about this technique so far is that it doesn't matter how many files you're importing, you only need to go through the import process once, and the function will be invoked for every single file in the folder that you've selected. The other great thing about it is that it responds to the number of files in the folder at the point you refresh the query. Let's just show you what that means. If I go back to the report view, let's just create a really quick simple column chart. I'm going to add it in a stacked column chart. And then I'd like to add the year as the axis field. So I'm just going to drag year into the axis box in the field well. And then I'm going to add in, let's add in the revenue column into the value area. And then let's add in the rank column into the legend. So we can see sort of the relative proportion of that each film contributes in terms of revenue to the total for each year. So it looks like 2015 had a fairly successful #1 ranked film. It had a larger proportion of the overall bar than the other years. If we wanted to see what that film actually was, we could add the title into the tooltips well. So if I select the chart again, and then let's add title into the tooltips section, I'll just change the name of that column so it's not called first title, it's just called title. I can do that by double clicking and then changing the name and then pressing enter. And then if I hover the mouse over the data point, it should show me that the name of the film in that case was Spectre. And then I can hover the mouse over individual data points in each of the charts or each of the columns to find out which film that piece of bar represents. Anyway, that was just creating a visual just to indicate what happens when we start changing which files are in a folder. So if I head back to the folder from which I imported all of my text files, UK Top 10 by Year Text, what I'm going to do is take the last 2 years, 2017 and 2018, and I'm going to move them into a different folder. I'll just click and drag them and put them in the PBI data folder. So that moves them back up to this level. If I then go back to the report and then choose to refresh it, my query doesn't break. It doesn't complain about not being able to find the 2017 and 2018 file names. It's not looking for those file names specifically. What it's really doing is looping through all the files in the collection of files in that folder, and it simply updates the data accordingly. It would of course have a bit of an effect if I had some filters on which were referring to the years 2017 and 2018, but as I haven't done that, this is absolutely fine. Again, just to show you that if I added in those same 2 files back into the original folder again, I can click and drag them back into the UK Top 10 by Year Text. So imagine we got the results for 2019 and we added that text file to the folder. All we would need to do then is refresh the data in the data model again, and that will requery the folder and bring back all the data for all 5 files. Now, one thing that will upset the importing of data is if we include a file in this folder which doesn't conform to the pattern that we've defined by our current files. So if I switch back to the folder which contains all of my sample extracted files, I'm going to look at the Films Top 10 2013. I just grabbed this table from Wikipedia. So the setup of this file is a little different. It does still have 5 columns, so rank, title, distributor, worldwide gross rather than revenue pounds millions, and year. I've also got some slightly different data types here as well, so that because I've just essentially copied this from a web page, the numeric value, which should be a number, is actually treated as text. So I've got a couple of issues here. I've got a different column name, worldwide gross, and I've got a different data type in that column as well. So let's watch what happens if I close down that file and then just move it into the UK top 10 by year text folder. If I then go back and choose to refresh my data, things will go somewhat wrong. It's complaining first of all about not being able to find the revenue pounds millions column in the first file it's importing. So I'm going to close that, and then let's have a quick look at how we could just resolve that problem fairly quickly. If I head back to the folder that I've just copied that file into, or moved that file into, I could, let's see, the quickest, simplest thing to do, I think, just to avoid getting things wrong, is I could open up an existing text file with the correct column headings, and then I can copy those column headings, and then close that file down, and then double click on the file that I've just moved, and then copy over the existing column headings with the correct set. So that's that problem solved. I can close down and save those changes. And then I can head back to my report and I can choose to refresh. It won't still won't work, but I get a different message this time. So I've got one of the loaded queries contained errors. You can probably guess which one it is. I've got 60 rows loaded, but 10 of them contain errors. Now I can look at the errors. If I click the View Errors button, it will take me to the query editor. Or I might need to click on that myself to show it. There we go. So here are the 10 rows containing errors. You can see the red underlined column here is the one with the errors in it. If I click on the cell containing the error, it shows me that the data format error, we couldn't convert to a number. So that was for fairly obvious reasons I think I showed you. Let's just close and apply, although we didn't actually do anything. And then let's head back to the folder containing the file. I'm certainly not going to bother fixing all of these problems here, but if I go back to the file and then I just change the first couple, let's take away the $sign and the double quotes around the revenue, and then take away the commas as well. So I just got a basic number. I'll do that for the first. Let's do it for the first 3 rows, just nice and quickly. So I can get rid of those, and then again, just for the 3rd row. Okay, so having done that, we can close down that text file and save it. And then we can refresh our data again, and this time we will get 7 errors rather than 10 errors, so I've fixed 3 of them. The other problem I've got though is that the scaling is all completely wrong, isn't it? The values for 2013 weren't scaled down at all. The values for 2013 were in the full 1,276,000,000 yada yada yada. Whereas if I were to exclude 2013 from this chart, let me just quickly filter out 2013. Let's use the filters tool from the visual level filters box. I can go to the year field. I can choose to show only years where the value is greater than 2013, and then apply that filter. So we'll see that the values for the other years are scaled down, so it's just 93.8 million. So if I wanted that to work for my 2013 data, if I just clear my filter to bring all that back, then I'd have to go back to my list of files in my folder, open up the file, and then let's see, so to scale that down, that's 1,276,000,000. So let's change that to 1,276, and then likewise 1,214,000,000. Get rid of the last 6 digits, and again get rid of the last 6 digits from the 3rd row there as well. And then if I close and save that, and then once again refresh the report to bring in the new data, this will still kind of overwhelm all the rest of the data because this is a figure for worldwide gross rather than just UK gross. So 2013 wasn't just wildly more successful than previous years. It's just the data is different worldwide rather than UK. So you hopefully can see the downside of using this technique. It's great when your files have that consistency in their column headings and data types and scaling, etc. But if you need to modify things, you don't really get the opportunity to do that in the query editor. You have to make sure that you do that by manually manipulating the file. Next, let's have a look at importing multiple Excel files and talk about the one extra consideration you need to make when doing that. So again, I'll create a new report for this by pressing Ctrl and N to create a new Power BI desktop file. And then when that's finished, I will close down the one that I'm working on at the moment. And I won't bother saving the changes to that. And then if we head back to the new desktop file when it's finally loaded, we can just close down the splash screen ready to get started. The 5 Excel files we're going to import contain basically the same data as our text files. If I have a quick look in the UK Top 10 by Year Excel folder, it's essentially the same 5 files, just in an Excel format. So if I head back to the Get Data button and choose Not Excel, as you might be tempted to do, but head to the More option and then choose Folder from the list. When the dialog finally appears, there we go. And then I can expand browse for a folder first and expand this PC, add OSC and PBI data and UK Top 10 by Year Excel. When I've done that, I can click OK. And then again, I can select I'll choose to combine all the files in one go. I'll combine and load them at the same time, just to take the shortest route to get the data imported. And then I'll need to choose my sample file. So I've got the first file that it encountered in the folder will be fine. The consistency between these files is the same as with the text files, same column names, etc. I do need to choose a worksheet from the file to import. So I'm going to select the top 10 films worksheet, which shows me the sample data there. And then I can click OK and have all those 5 files combined into one single continuous list. Shouldn't take too long. Get a bit of progress, creating the connection, loading the data to the model, and eventually, when we're loaded, there we go. So I've got my table imported, a quick look in the data view just to check that the data looks sensible, and there we go. We can now make similar changes to the Excel data as we did to the text file data. So for example, if we didn't have the year column, we could recreate that by extracting the year from the source name column, or we could edit the query to remove the source name altogether. We should prove as well that we can get similar responses if we change the numbers of files in the folder, that the query will respond. So for example, if I created, what should I do this time? Let's have a tree map this time, just to show us something, a slightly different visual. If I had a tree map, and into that tree map, I will add in, let's say, the rank column, and then also, actually I want the rank in the group rather than the values, and then I'd like to have the revenue in the values area, so we see the relative proportion that each ranked film makes of the total. We could have another tree map next door to that, one which breaks this down by, let's say, by year instead. If I add the year into the group, and then I can add in the revenue into the values area, I get a breakdown by year. And I could perhaps have all of these, both of these tree maps filtered by the distributor. So let's add a slicer to the top of the report. Let's just resize it and then add in the distributor field to that. I like to have some buttons, I think, rather than some little check boxes to check. So with the slicer selected, I can head to the format panel in the ribbon, also in the pane on the right hand side. And then in the general section, I can change the orientation to horizontal, so I get some nice big clicky buttons. Let's just resize those a little bit. So if I pick Walt Disney, that shows me the relative proportion of that Walt Disney films make up, and Universal and Studio Canal, etc., etc. So there we go. There's my my basic visualizations. So to prove that this is working when I change the Excel files in the folder, let's head back to a Windows Explorer window. Let's take out the 2017 and 2018 files and move them back to the PBI data folder instead. And then if I refresh the data in the report, everything will update to include only that data from those 3 selected years. Again, if I put those Excel files back, if I select those 2 files and move them back into the Excel folder, and then refresh the report again, once again, I get all the data back. Just as with text files, if there are discrepancies between the various Excel files you're importing in terms of things like column names or data types, then you'll see errors just as we did for text files. There is one other consideration we need to make for Excel as well, however. If I switch back to my PBI data folder and find my film's top 10 2013 file, this separate floating Excel file here, if I open this one up, this is a slightly better configured version than the text file was. So I've got the correct column name here. I've got revenue pounds million, so that matches all the other column names in the other Excel files. I've scaled down the numbers as well, so these are all numeric values now, not text, and I've scaled them down so that they should behave correctly. There is one big difference, however, you might notice. It's easy to miss this, but the little worksheet name here, Top 10 Movies 2013, that's different to the name of the worksheet in all of the other Excel files. So if I close that file down and then just move it into my top 10, UK Top 10 by year Excel, and then refresh the report to refresh the queries and get the new data, it fails immediately. UK Top 10 by year Excel didn't match any rows in the table. So the worksheet name prevents this from working. If I close that dialog box down and then head back to the folder of Excel files, if I wanted to see the correct file name or correct worksheet name I should be using, I can open up any of the existing files, top 10 films, and that's the same worksheet name used in every single one of the other files. So I can close that down and then rename the worksheet for 2013. If I can double click to open that one up, I can call this one top 10 films. And then when I've renamed that and saved it and closed it and then refresh the report, this time I'll see that 2013 does indeed come in to the report. Again, because the results are worldwide for 2013 as opposed to UK only for the other years, we'll see that 2013 completely overwhelms the other years. For the final part of this video, let's have a look at what happens if you try to import from a folder containing a mix of files. Let's head back to our list of files in these folders, and I'll go back to the PBI data folder. And I'd like to create a new folder here just called something similar like all files or mixed files, something like that. Then I'm going to head back to my Excel folder and I'll copy everything except for the 2013 data. And I'll go back to my all files folder and paste those in there. Then I'll go back to the PBI data and go for my text files and again get everything except for the 2013 data. Copy those files, head back to all files and then paste them in. Then we'll create another brand new blank report, so I'll press Ctrl N in Power BI Desktop to create a new report. And then when that has loaded, or as it's loading, I'll close down the other one we've been working on. And I'm not going to bother saving the changes. You're more than welcome to if you'd like to, but I'm not going to bother. I'll just go back to my new report and then close down the splash screen. So if we begin then by heading to the Get Data button, I'll just click the top half of the button this time to get my full list of connectors, and I can choose Folder and then choose Connect. And then I will choose to browse to the folder I've just created. So this PC, OSC, PBI data, all files, and then click OK once and OK again. Now in this step, I'm going to get a list of all the possible files in that folder. So I get the mix of Excel and text files. If I did attempt to combine these, I'd be forced to pick a single sample file for importing. And of course, I can't make one single sample file work for both Excel and text files in this import. They're fundamentally different file types. So let's say for this first example, I just want to import the text files from that folder. I can't get to it here by just clicking Combine and then Combine and Edit or Combine and Load, or by Load. What I'll need to do first is tidy up this list so that it only shows me text files in the first place. So let's do that by clicking the Edit button, and that will load us into the query editor and allow us to make changes so that the combination works on just one type of file. By far the easiest thing to do here is just to filter my list of files to include only TXT files, and I can do that by clicking the drop down arrow next to the extension column and then simply unchecking the XLSX box to exclude those files from the list. So that filters my list for just the 5 text files. I then need to combine the contents of those files into one single list, And I can do that either by selecting the content column on the left hand side and then clicking the Combine Files button on just below Append Queries, or I can just click on the Combine Files button that's shown in the column header there. So let's click Combine Files, and then everything else will happen essentially automatically. If I have a first file selected, it sort of takes us back to that step of the wizard. So I've got a sample file selected, which is the first file in the folder. I can then just click OK, and then the rest of the queries will be generated for me automatically. As we saw earlier on, these 4 separate sort of intermediate steps, and we end up with a full complete list of all the files content. While I'm here, let's just delete the source name column. I don't need that. I can right click and remove that column. And then I can simply close and apply that query to load all that back into the data model with a list of text files. So the query changes will be applied. There's my table appearing, and in the data view, there's all the data from those 5 files. We could, of course, then go and create a separate query which extracts just the data from the Excel files, and that should be fairly easy for you to work out how to do if you'd like to have a bit of an extra practice by doing that. But at this stage, I think we've covered all the things I'd like to talk about in terms of importing data from multiple files in the same folder for this video. Hope you found some of those techniques useful and that you'll find a use for them in the real world. Thanks for watching. See you next time.